Hello everyone. I'm excited to welcome you all to today's exciting Oxygen XML Live event. My name is Alina Bellu, and as always, I will be your host for a special webinar that marks the third part of our Transforming DITA Documents to PDF using CSS webinar series titled Advanced Fonts Usage. So today we are meeting Julian Licor again, software developer at Synchrosoft, to help us continue the journey into defining the look and format of PDF documents. In just a few moments, he will be starting another extensive and highly informative tutorial, this time dedicated to adding custom fonts in CSS. So by the end of this webinar, we will have all the tools needed to use system fonts and web fonts, import and use font files, use Oxygen Styles Basket to define fonts, and so much more. But before we start, I'll take just a few moments to share with you some of the useful information that you need to know when it comes to our live events. As always, all of our webinars are being recorded, so today's event makes no difference. After the webinar comes to an end, the recording will be made available on the event page on our site, oxygenxml.com, along with Julian's presentation slides and samples, and also the recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel titled Oxygen XML, where I encourage you to take a look at the impressive library of the tutorials that are there especially for you. Another important aspect is that as we go along, we encourage you to ask us questions by using the questions panel from the GoToWebinar interface, where another one of our colleagues will assist us by answering to all of your questions in real time. And of course, we will be addressing the questions again at the end in a Q&A session for the benefit of everyone joining us today. So with this being said, let us give a warm welcome to Julian Lecor as he is taking the virtual stage. Hello, Julian, and great to have you back.
Hello, Aline. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome. So, as Aline said, today we will see how to fully use the fonts inside a PDF document using CSS. So first of all, let's start with the basics. In order to customize the fonts in CSS, we need to use the available font properties. For example, here is a small list with the usual properties, which are the font family, the font weight or font size. And on the right side, you can see some really small example on how to use them. An important notion when using fonts in PDFs is that the PDF standard already provides you a list of 14 fonts. These fonts are automatically embedded in every PDF document, and they are available in all the PDF viewers. The list contains the following fonts, which is Courier, Helvetica, Times Roman, Symbol, and Zavdimbat. And regardless of what you use in your PDF, if no fonts are declared, those fonts will be used. Besides the standard fonts, Oxygen Publishing Engine and Oxygen PDF Chemistry support the system font, like Arial or Times New Roman. By system fonts, I mean all the default font packages that are available in the operating system. This is why in the list I wrote the Windows fonts or the Linux or Mac OS fonts, which are packages. And in addition to the system fonts, you can also use TrueType or OpenType font format. To declare also, you can also, make your fonts declaration using fallback fonts. To declare fallback fonts, you just need to declare a comma-separated list as the value of the font family property. The list can contain both a family name or generic name. As in the example below, I use two named families and the generic monospace family name. Oxygen PDF Chemistry has its own fallback fonts list, which is automatically triggered when a generic font is present as a font family value. There is a list for each of the serif, sans serif, or monospace generic families. And of course, there is also a specific list to each operating system based on the pre-installed system fonts that I talked before. So this list will work both on Windows, Linux, or macOS systems. Now, without further ado, let's begin with our first subject, how to declare a web font. For this, you just simply need to use the import CSS at rule in combination with the URL function. For example, I will use a font from the Google Fonts website. So as an example, I just need to go into the Google Fonts website. I can do my search, select the font I want to use. I will select from the list the styles that I want to use. So for my example, I will check only the regular form and the bold form and italic for both. I simply select the import option and I will copy the rule from the website and use it directly into Oxygen. So as you may see, I already copied the rule. And once this rule is copied, I can directly use it in my CSS, but I will show this a little later. Another way to declare fonts is to use local fonts. By local, I mean files that you have directly installed on your computer. So in this case, you need to use the font face CSS at rule instead of the import. This rule uses all the classic font properties that I show you at the beginning of this webinar. So the font family, style, weight, etc. And of course, the main difference is that we have to use also the source property, which will be combined in most of the case with the URL function once again to point to the correct font file. A small side note here, you must declare each font style or font weight separately. In most of the cases, this will be the case for italic or for bold fonts. So another small point here is that under the hood, the web font system uses the same display. So it uses behind the scene the same rule using the font face. The only difference is that you directly access the URL and you don't have to copy all these rules. So as you may see, there is the font family, style, weight, etc., and the URL, which is going to the Google place. You can see that the font are not from TrueType or OpenType format, as I mentioned before. So you may think that they are not supported by Oxygen PDF Chemistry or our Oxygen publishing engine. But this is just because Google's API returns a style sheet depending on the application that requests it. So as I open the link in the browser, the API returns me a web open font format that are supported by my browser. But when Oxygen PDF Chemistry does the same call to the Google API, the format will be on TTF or OTF format, so that they can be used by Oxygen PDF Chemistry. So back into my example, I will not use the import rule that I copied before, but another solution that I can use is that I have my 4 declarations matching these 4 TTF files that I have already on my computer, and I just have to declare them separately, as I explained, because I have 4 different type of fonts or variants of fonts, which is the regular, the italic and regular, and the bold and italic. Once all my fonts are imported or declared, how do I use them? I just need to use the font properties I presented at the beginning of this webinar. A small precision here, the font style is usually normal or italic, and the weight are usually numbers or names. So back in my example, you have seen that I use 400 and 700. They are just the correspondence for regular and for bold. Let's hold a second to see some best practices for font declaration before going into practice. The first rule is prefer always write the family names using quotation marks, so either simple quote or double quote. In case the name contains spaces, the process will fail due to a wrong name, so you have to indicate the name using quotation marks. Second, keep the same name when declaring a font. You might be tempted to declare the fonts with different names, for example, by adding bold or italic to it, but you should prefer keeping the same name. It is enough to use the font style or the font weight in the rule that uses the fonts to distinguish all the font variants. And the last but not the least rule, don't forget to add fallback fonts. You can never be 100% sure that one font will cover all the characters or all the symbols that are present in your files. You can just add, for example, a generic family name. Chemistry will do the job. With all of this, I can use my declare font directly in my customization. So as you can see here, I wrote some simple rules that uses the different fonts that I declare here. So in my document, I will use my font. And in my margin, I will use another font, which is a Windows pre-installed font. So as you may have seen already, I define some fonts for my header and footer. How I did this, I simply used the page CSS add rule. And if I would like, because you may need to define multiple fonts or multiple font sizes or font weight for different pages, you can make some differences simply by using the fonts, the page, sorry, CSS rule and the page name you want to modify. For example, if you want to modify the chapter and use a bigger header or a different font, you can simply indicate the page number. For those who want to know all the different font, different page name, sorry, I let you the link which leads directly to our user guide, where you can find all the list of the page names. So back into my Oxygen, I have two rules for my content, one for the global content and one for the page, the main title. And I already defined a rule for my headers and footers. So I will simply use, for today's example, a small publishing template, which has already defined a few CSS style sheets. And I can recreate my transformation. So I duplicate the basic scenario. I select my custom publishing template, and I can simply run my transformation. And you will see that in the final output, of course, it will reflect the fonts I selected. And we will see that in a few moments. So let's move on into my PDF viewer. Wait a little for my transformation to finish. Okay, now, so as you may see, if I check my document properties, besides all the other fonts that can be used in my document, you will find the one that I declare, so 3 for the Open Sans font, and the 2 fonts that are used in my headers. And we can also, of course, verify the same option by editing the text and seeing that the text is in the correct font. So now let's get back into our document. For people who already use the styles basket or want to use the styles basket, it is of course possible to do the same thing directly from the styles basket interface. For this, you have 2 different options. So you have a dedicated fonts gallery, which lets you 2 different options: the custom font options, where you can upload your own files. So if I go into an Oxygen styles basket, available once again at styles.oxygenxml.com, I will go into custom fonts, select that I want to use custom fonts, and I can directly drag my fonts. So for example, if I want to use the Open Sans bold for the title and the regular for the rest of the text. So you may see that the preview is already updated with the correct font. I can download my sample. So I have here a full working archive, which is an Oxygen publishing template. And within this publishing template, if I open the CSS which has been generated by Oxygen Styles Basket, you can see that I will find the font face declaration for the 2 files I already uploaded, except their name has been replaced. But you can see that the Styles Basket uses exactly the same way that we have here in the manual generated style sheet. The other option is that to use the preset fonts. This gallery lets you select between preset styles which use system fonts, Windows system fonts, or Google fonts. So if I go back to my styles basket, so I don't want to use custom fonts anymore. And I will select a small example. For example, this one. Once again, the preview is refreshed to reflect what I selected. I can download directly my new template, and back into Oxygen, I can open the new generated publishing template. And in this case, what you can already see is that we don't have the font face declarations anymore, but instead we have the import declarations. And of course, you can find back all the different rules, for example, here in the headers or for all my titles. So now that we know how to use the basic of our fonts in PDF, another requirement that you can have when you create multiple books or multiple PDFs is that you may need different fonts depending on the language that you are using inside your document. For example, if you are using an Arabic document, or if you have a document in an Asian language. For this, we can use exactly the same kind of rules that we have created before, except that we will add the lang pseudo class to them. In this case, if the lang or the XML lang attribute is present in the content, and if the CSS selector use the same language, the processor will automatically apply the specific property. So the rule will be overridden, the default rule will be overridden by the language rule. So for today's webinar, I already created two different documents. One is in Arabic and one is in Chinese. So the only modification I made into my documents is that I added the XML lang attribute on the root of the bookmap, and that's all. I don't set it anywhere in the rest of the document. Here I did exactly the same for the Chinese version. And I created a small CSS sample which uses once again what we have seen previously. So one font from Google, which is the Noto Sans Simplified Chinese, and another font I have on my side, which is called El Mesiri, which will be used for the Arabic text. And I simply reuse the same rules that I defined here, except that I add the language pseudo class to them. So one for Arabic, one for Chinese, and the same rule for the title. And we can directly open the different generated outputs. And if I go into, once again, to the properties, you can see that besides all the preset fonts, you will find back the fonts that I already defined specifically for one language and for the other, here and here. So this is the best way to have only, like in my use case, I have only one customization, but I have 3 different data maps, 3 different languages, but all of them have their own specificity. Another requirement may be to create fully accessible PDFs, but once again, how to create them? A fully accessible PDF meets the regulation set in the section 508 amendment, and they are compliant the ISO standard PDF UA1. This standard contains, amongst others, the following rules. All the real content must be tagged in order to reflect the PDF structure. So this is already done by Oxygen Publishing Engine default style sheet, so you don't have to create other tagging. So we already have a preset style sheet that will tag all the accessible content. For example, the titles or the paragraphs or the figures, etc. Alternate text must be available also for figures and images. This can easily be done using the DITA alt element. And the last point is the point that we will focus on today, is that all the fonts must be embedded. So to activate this feature also, you need to set the PDF accessibility option, the PDF accessibility, parameter in the data transformation to yes. So in order to make my PDF fully accessible, so I will first uncomment the parameter called PDF accessibility in my publishing template. And I've already created an accessibility style sheet which will embed the last fonts that I don't have already embedded in my document. So I will keep the Open Sans font. I will keep the Sego UI, which is used as a preset by Windows. And I added other declarations for the other fonts to make sure that my document is fully compliant with the standard. So I will run again the transformation, and you will see that now the generated file will be PDF UA1 compliant. So during the time that the PDF is generated, one thing you have to note is that those fonts can either be not from the 14 standard fonts, or they can also be from the standard font, like the Times font, which is in the 14 list. All the fonts must be included, including these ones. So now I have, once again, my document. You can see here the small icon that indicates that I'm in conformance with the PDF UA1 standard. And if I check a little my fonts list I have in my PDF, you can see that the big difference from the first time I run the transformation and this time is that all the fonts are indicated as embedded. So this is why I'm compliant with the standard. So you may have seen some warnings, maybe if you already have used the Oxygen Publishing Engine or Oxygen and tried to make some data transformations. The most common that you can have are listed here, and for each of them I will give you a small explanation on what they are and how to avoid them. So one of the most common warning that you have is that the transformation, the processor told you that the coverage set class table is not yet supported. This is a message that can be ignored, and this message will also be removed in Oxygen 25. It simply means that the font, all the features available in the font will not be supported by the processor, but you can still use these fonts inside the PDFs. Just that, for example, if you are using Latin ligatures, sometimes you can see that the whole ligatures are not present in the document. Another common error that can appear during a transformation is that a glyph with the question mark is not available in the font. In all the cases, this simply means that the font you are using does not have a matching glyph for one character. This can be easily reproduced in, for example, if I want to use a Chinese content and I use a font that does not support all the CJK and Asian languages. And you will simply have in your PDF a lot of sharp symbols and a lot of warnings in your transformation. So you just have to change the font and use, for example, a different font that like I use here until you find the correct font that can render all the glyphs that you want to be displayed in your document. And the last kind of warning that you can have is the one indicating that for PDF UA1, so if you want a fully accessible PDF, all fonts, even the base 14 fonts, have to be embedded. This is what I was talking about before. If somehow I forgot to declare a basic font and try to rerun the transformation will fail with the indication that one font is not embedded correctly. And so the only way to don't have this problem is to have a forced declaration of this font in your CSS style sheets. So we will have to wait a little because chemistry has to enter in the process. So you see the transformation failed. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I have the coverage set class for one of my fonts, but this I don't have to worry about. It's not a problem. What is really a problem is this message saying that one of the fonts is not embedded. And the font is indicated here, Times Roman, which is in fact I renamed into Times into my document because this is the matching name. And so this is why I also embed this font into my document, because I need to have all of them embedded. Some of you may have remarked why I don't declare into my fully accessible PDF the Segoe UI font, but still my document is fully accessible. The reason is really simple. It's just because the PDF standard for PDF UI1 only mentioned that the fonts used in the content must be embedded. So you don't have, normally you should not need to declare the fonts used in the margins, but as a best practice, I really recommend you to do so to make sure that all your fonts are embedded in your document. So as usual, for people that want to go further into what I did today, you can find at the end of the presentation all the useful links which I used to create all these slides. Inside each of them, you can find some fully detailed information, and you can also find some how-tos if you want some more advanced processing for your fonts. Also, before leaving you, we want to know how was the information presented in this webinar. Was it too easy for you or too hard, maybe? Okay. Okay, so I will let a little few seconds more to all the people to vote. Okay, so I think, okay, for most of you, it was perfect for my needs, and I'm glad. I covered all your needs, and I'm glad to do that. And for people that think it was too simple or too complex, I just have to mention that if you still have questions, you can put them in the questions panel, or directly ask them on our support email address, which is support@oxygenxml.com. And of course, I want to thank you for being with me today. And if you have questions, this is the moment.
Thank you, Julian, for another greatly informative presentation. So let's go to the questions panel. We just got a question. So, Julian, if you can help us. The question sounds like this. I like the different fonts in the different books. What is the easiest way to change the chapters to sections in one book? I will give you control again, if you don't mind.
Yep. I'm not sure I understand fully the question. If Manfred wants to, means that changing the displayed text into the PDF, or if you want to change the element from chapters to sections. But if you want to change on the generated PDF that you want the text called section X instead of chapter X, the easiest way to do that is to open the file, for example, in your browser. Okay, it was a little longer than I expected. Okay, you can open the console on the browser, and you can directly change the default rules that are applied by default in our documents. So for example, you can take this one, or I can put it here, and one again for the title displayed in the table of contents. I think I have maybe already seen this in another webinar, but we can have it in other webinars. So if it's just what Manfred wants, you can just have the text display to be here section. And if I transform once again my document, I will have a section, and then the section number is instead of chapter and chapter number. But I'm not sure what if it was exactly what Manfred wants. So maybe he can write back to us if this is what he mean by changing the chapters to section, or if it was something else and I maybe mistake.
Yes,
It seems that
Manfred
I answered.
just confirmed. Yeah, you knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, and you already can see the result, Manfred. So you will have section 1, 2, 3, etc., and the same in the content. So these usually are the rules you have to modify, but you can have them directly by debugging, what we call debugging the CSS. There is also a full topic about that in our user guide. If you go to debug CSS, debug, sorry, you have the full explanation on what I did in my browser. Exactly, it's just the difference is that it's just written.
A follow-up question, but the first book
Keep
could the
chapters.
first book, yeah, keep its chapters.
Yeah. For this, you may take a look on the. I think it's the first of type CSS pseudo class. So you have to add before the rules the first of type I think if I don't mistake, it's the rule you need to apply on the first one. So we can check it directly. So I will add before and first of type. And to make sure, I will add back the chapter. And you should have, sorry, to make sure that which one I modified the, no, I mistake, I think. Topic. Maybe I just, I'm not 100% sure of my rule, but you may have to check. I know why. It's because I have to put here the first of type. So now you should have no, once again. I'm sorry, I'm not fully sure of the rules, but I'm pretty sure that you have to use the first of type rule. But you can ask me back in the support, and if I took a little more time, I will give you the correct rule. But I think I'm not so far from the expected what we need. Maybe in Oxygen it's better to see. No, so I need to check why or how to apply this one. I'm not sure exactly how I wrote this one, but you can do this.
Thank you, Julian. For sure, we will check the list of questions after, and we can provide a more extensive answer.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if Manfred, you can directly write us on the support, and I will give you back the full answer for this one.
Manfred agrees with
Yeah.
us, so thank you for our audience's patience. I will take back control for the last time, as no other questions seem to be showing up. So, Julian, again, thank you for taking the time to present to us today's subject, and of course, for answering our audience's questions. So, thank you. And of course, I am so grateful that again you all joined us for this week's event. And until next time, stay safe and taking in consideration your respective time zones, have a nice day or evening. Bye bye.
Goodbye.